Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Warner, and today I'm here to talk to you about. Oh, there's the slide. There we go. Wargaming large-scale combat operations. So before I go to the next slide, I think it's just a quick background. Started wargaming when I was 12, and Warhammer 40K, mostly miniatures gaming. And it wasn't until recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, I just started to discover the world of professional wargaming and board gaming. So right now, I'm a student at the Command and General Staff College here at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, getting a master's degree in wargame design. So this is a reflection of the master's degree and my thesis to create a large-scale combat operations wargame. All right, so I'll go over to the next slide. So I won't read the whole problem statement, but it's right there. The issue that I saw when coming up with this thesis was large-scale combat operations, so specifically at the division level, and something that's approachable. As you can see on the right-hand side, I just threw some images of other great games that are out there. Some of them, like the Next War series, are a little bit too high up in the strategic level to be relevant for future division staff planners in the United States Army or in the Marine Corps. And then Assassin's Mace, while very good and not very complex, considering all the things it meshes together, it presents a little bit too many options for the user, to be honest. If we're looking at something that's going to be done in 90 minutes from when you open up the game, because usually 90 minutes is as much time as you get for leader professional development. So that's kind of like the scope of my project and the inspiration that I took from to go forward. So here, as you can see, we're trying to create a large-scale combat operations game at the division level. And the key for me was playable under 2 hours from when you open the box to when you close the box. All right, so lots of games have influenced the development of this game. And when we go into a little bit more, you'll see mechanics from Sam Mustafa's Blucher. That's kind of in there a little bit. You have the unknown order aspect. Battle for Moscow, it's a game that Dr. Starrett and Mike Dunn over here at CGSC have us play. It's kind of like the intro to wargaming if you have no wargaming experience. Great game. So obviously that served as like a foundational layer. So kind of somewhere between a full-scale, like Fistful of Toes game and miniatures, right? And what Battle of Moscow presents is kind of like the space that I wanted this game to exist in. So specifically for the military audience, some of the issues that we see is the people who are the desired audience for this is they're not wargamers, right? Or they have very little experience to wargaming. So you have to have something that's very good at the entry level that uses doctrinal terms, doctrinal tasks. And then, of course, like probability has to be grounded in doctrine. So it's kind of a little bit tighter of a rule set, a little bit tighter of a CRT. Combat results table that we developed. But just to keep it within that point of realism, because the idea is to have this game to inform division planners. But also there is utility beyond this for it to be a game outside that scope as well. I'm sure there's other games out there. I know Assassin's Mace has very specific things, right? But it's also a fun game to play, right? You can't make a game that informs but isn't fun, because then no one's going to play it more than once. And then I forgot to say in the beginning, if you have any questions, please post them and I'll answer them as they come up. And also for those of you watching in the future, if you post your comments to YouTube, I'll either hit it up as Decisive Operations or as my real YouTube name, and I'll try to answer your questions. I should have mentioned that earlier. But yeah, questions welcomed, and I'll stop for the questions. All right, so that's the wargaming experience that kind of informed the creation of this game. And then the core design around was the game was this menu of options. So you have multiple brigades. It's a division level game where you're maneuvering brigades. And you have a menu of options for the different brigades that exist and what you want them to do. And the idea was to emulate decisions that the division staff would have, right? The division staff or the division commander is going to tell a brigade commander go seize the objective, and that's an 06 who's the brigade commander, right? He's a colonel. He's been in the army for a minute. We're not going to actually tell him how to do it. We're just going to tell him what we want to be done or the effects we want to achieve, right? So trying to take a layer back to what people are used to seeing in war games. And so that's when this card came up. So we have this system, this war game that we play right now at Command Staff General College called Land Power. And it does a very good job at simulating or replicating all the intricacies that exist in modern combat. However, there is a tendency for people to do what they know. And what ends up happening is when we play Land Power, it's a very, very well done staff lead up, staff exercises, products are done, products are created. But when the game gets played, people get sucked into the combat aspect of it. And it really becomes a multiple brigade fight instead of a division fight. And looking at US Army doctrine, right, the division's supposed to be looking 48 hours out. So with this in mind, this informed what I want to do, how this game wants to drive. And really for my game Decisive Operations, the driving force of this game is planning future operations while also managing current operations. And we'll get into the next slide of how we did that. Oh, actually, first, so combat results. So combat resolution is always a sticky subject when it comes, especially when you have members of the military or members of an organization who do the thing you're replicating in the war game in real life, right? They have set expectations of what they want to see. Doctrine has groomed us to, understand certain variables. So you have a very strict left and right limit. And then also experience, right? Experience everything from reading or watching about future or current wars or past wars and results that happen in there, right? It's not realistic for an SA-15 to completely neutralize an attack helicopter brigade, right? So just making sure the combat resolution table is within the realms of reasonable. So the way we went after this was to try to stay as close to standard deviation as possible with the 2d6 roll. And really what we have here is you're going to have almost 68% of the time, what's going to happen is what's supposed to happen doctrinally. And the benchmark for this was, if you look at Army Doctrine, if you look at our current combat results tables or our correlation of forces models that we have, if you are attacking and attacker versus defender, hasty attack, hasty defense, 3-to-1 odds. 3-to-1 odds are favorable odds for that attack, and you will inflict, as the attacker, double damage, right? So the attacker would take 20% casualties, and the defender is projected to take 40% casualties. Very basic, but we took that core mathematical solution or foundation of doing double damage for what doctrine says is a successful military operation, and extrapolate that to go beyond the CRT, right? So the CRT is 68% of the time. So I believe it's a roll of 5 to 10 is grounded in doctrine, right? So you'll get that double damage if you're doing 3-to-1 odds, or depending on your situation, whatever the favorable odds are. And then you'll have about 16% of the time greater than what you expected to happen, and then 16% of the time less than what you expected to happen. And that's to go and throw chance into it. Chance is a big part or plays a big role in combat operations. Clausewitz talks about it. We study it here at the Command Staff General College. So it really seemed to be disingenuous to develop a war game that doesn't involve chance. However, what you don't want to happen is a brigade attack a battalion, have 3-to-1 odds, have all these racked and stack assets of air and aviation and indirect artillery, and then you roll the dice and nothing happens, right? Because if you're looking at combat power, right, combat power is an amalgamation of your will on the battlefield. So everything from the amount of personnel you have, the amount of equipment you have, and the amount of energy that that organization spent. So if you're doing an operation in this game, even if it's a successful operation, you're going to lose combat power. Because the fact is, before that unit moved, right? So the unit is less effective now than it was before it was activated. And that's something that I've noticed that in playtesting and also in some of the other simulations or war games that we do, it kind of gets lost because we're still very centered around we have experience in coin, right? All my experience is in coin. My experience in large scale combat operations was a tank platoon leader in Korea, very minimal. So really, what do operations look like 74 hours, 96 hours out that are contested, right? Your unit's going to be degraded. So that's what we tried to emulate here with the combat results table. All right, and there's the math there for that. So as you can see, it's a sliding chart. So for 3-to-1 odds, favorable or what doctrine is going to say is going to be the median, is going to be the 68% chance. So what we wanted to have happen was a 4-to-1 attack that doesn't go the way it's supposed to go should go better than a 3-to-1 attack that went the way or that didn't go the way it was supposed to go. So it was kind of this very tight realm. So we had to expand out a little bit, and we gave 6 combat points, or we'll call them 6 health points, right, to the unit. Step losses, that's the word I was looking for. So each unit has 6 steps before it's removed from the table. By doing that, I know a lot of games use 3 or 4. By doing 6, it allowed us to stay within the realm of green, amber, red, which is something it's part of the language that we speak in the military, right? We understand, or at least we have the conceptual idea of what happens when, hey, this unit, it's amber. Okay, so very baseline, still able to do its duty, but not as effective as green. So it gave us a little bit of wiggle room there in the rule set for combat losses. So you can see that there for the combat resolution. And then 1-to-1 odds, even the best thing you can hope for is a push, right? 2 combat losses to 2 combat losses. But that is still not favorable, so it still falls in line to doctrine. So as a wargamer playing this game, don't want to do 1-to-1 because you're going to severely degrade your force and lose that opportunity to attack. All right, let me see right here what in chat real quick if there's any slides or any questions. All right. Okay, yep. So I can go back. So 68% of probability is just what happens with 2d6 when between 5 and 10. And as you can see there, between, I'm sorry, 5 and 9. So between 5 and 9 gives you that 68% chance. I guess no real reason. There was no further data that I could find about the probability, right? So really, it just centered the foundational center for that was what doctrine says is going to happen, a little bit better and a little bit worse. And while parsing it out through the construct of dice, it just happened that 5 through 9, more often than not, doctrine is going to happen, and then less often, greater or less than doctrine. Hopefully that answers the question. No, you don't have to attack. So you have the option to attack. So I can go back here. So you see that move arrow. Attack is implied with move in this game. So you tell a unit to attack, or you tell that unit to move. You give it that move order. If you land adjacent to the enemy on the hex map, which is over here, you have the option to attack. So no, you don't have to attack if you're adjacent to the enemy. And then that gives us a little bit of wiggle room, right, between a hasty attack and a deliberate attack. So if you have to move to attack, hasty attack. If you don't have to move to attack, deliberate attack. And then I'll post it here too, but I was able to get a very basic version of this game up on Tabletop Simulator. So there is a mod for this game on Tabletop Simulator. I haven't really published a Tabletop Simulator before. I've played in it before. So yeah, feel free to play it there, try to break it on there, and let me know how the combat result systems or how you feel about the game, please. All right, and then so for terrain, terrain is obviously okay. So the scale for this game, so each hex is 10 kilometers, and a brigade is used through square, right? So you have a 24 millimeter square that has a sticker on it. One side it will have the symbol of your forces, and the other side will have the unit symbol. Eventually, once this thesis is done and this game is in somewhat of its final form, hopefully 9 more months from now, I hope to extrapolate it to a miniatures game. I think it'd be rather simple to do, rather easy to do, because there's a lot more abstraction that you can get away with in the rule set for miniatures game. But specifically for this to be an LPD game or a leader professional development game, it had to be what's it called? The Christmas morning test. It had to pass the Christmas morning test of I have a box, I open the box, I can play it right away, and I put it away and put it back on the shelf. So that was one of the variables that I took in consideration. And it pained me a little bit to create a board game rather than a miniature game. So terrain. So we tried to keep as much as we could doctrinally focused. So you have unrestricted terrain, restricted terrain, and heavily restricted terrain. I had a teammate in CGSC, Avi Bloom, who pulled this map off for me. Fantastic job. And what he did here is he correlated some of the data. So what you don't see are the roads, right? Because the roads are just kind of background noise to the game. They had no real effect. And that's something I really struggled with showing the roads. But then if you show the roads and they have no effect, why are you showing the roads? So where the roads are is where it would be restricted terrain, but now it's not restricted. I don't know if that makes sense, but you can see it up there in the top right-hand corner, that area that looks like it should be restricted terrain. That's a major highway that's going down there. So when we sat there and we looked at it, you kind of had this convoluted rivers and roads. So we went ahead and made it unrestricted terrain because there's a road going there, and that kind of serves the purpose for the abstraction of the game. But little things like that are things you don't really think about when you're looking at a map, and especially when you're building a board game, is you want to show everything, right? Because there is learning through playing, right? There is through osmosis by looking at a map, you understand the environment around you. So you want to have as much information on that map as possible, or as much information in that game as possible. But it also has to be relevant, and it can't deter from the game. So by taking the roads out, it was one less thing that playtesters could argue about. And then really all you got to know is it restricted, unrestricted, or heavily restricted. And realistically, for the purpose of a military game, that kind of stuff's already going to be done in the MACU, right, in the combined overlay. So those division staff planners are already looking at something that's already well produced, not really looking at raw map data. So here in the right-hand side of the map, you'll see the 72-hour chart. So this is the real engine of the game. I'm just going to talk it off the picture because I was struggling to find a way to describe it other than to talk about it. So really what you're looking at is 72 hours out, 48 hours out, and now in 24. The language is now, next turn, turn X after next. That's because each turn is a day. So you are replicating a day. So what you do here is you're able to plan operations 3 days in advance, which falls in line with where our Army doctrine is going for divisions focusing 48 hours out. And there's a point system to the orders. So for these orders, if you're going to plan something 72 hours out, it's going to cost you 1 planning point. If you're going to plan something next turn, which is labeled next turn on the map there, it's 2 points. And if you're going to execute now, it's 3 points. And so what happens is at the start of your turn, your opponent is going to roll 3d6. They're going to roll that, and that is closed information. You as the active player do not know that information. So your opponent knows how many order points you have, and you start from 72 hours and work your way down the chart. So once you start planning out operations next turn, you can't go back and plan 72 hours out. So you work yourself down until you go over your limit, and your opponent says you're done. That's something that was very, for me, revolutionary playing in Blucher. It just added this next level of unknown. And I think that's important to drive home unknown resources when thinking about resources for division planning. And it might be some personal bias. I use Blucher to help describe to junior military intelligence lieutenants about combat operations or center of gravity. We did a lot of LPDs using Blucher, especially John Boyd's OODA loop. Concepts they weren't getting in the unit that we were in, but the job he was going to need to know it. So we used Blucher, and that was a really good experience from a guy who wasn't a wargamer. So I wanted to find a way to adopt that unknown resource element to this game. Let me see if I can catch up on the questions. Okay, so logistical, I'm sorry if I'm missing this in any order. To teach division commanders how to handle their divisions better. Really, it's aimed towards the staff planner, right? So a way to inform staff officers before they go into MDMP. So the objective for this game, in the game, is to seize that red area in the middle. Right, that is a town in Thailand. In this scenario, you have the Chinese army coming down, I think it's Highway 2 in Thailand, trying to go to Bangkok, and you have a Striker Brigade combat team with some partner nation forces assisting them. And really, what do you want to drive out of here is what are the things I need to think about as a division planner? Because coming from a brigade combat team, you think about maneuvering battalions, you think about what's happening today, maybe what's happening tomorrow. When we do the land power, everybody is focused on the hour fight, the intraday fight. So really what we want to focus here is the important planning considerations you can make 72 hours out with imperfect information. So for logistics, logistics in this game is somewhat abstracted. Okay, I'll wait for the logistics. Thanks for the question, Andy. So does the random amount of staff effort represent variations in productivity, the amount of distractions, or something else? The answer is yes, all the above. So all the things that were frankly too hard to think about or to draw out individually is abstracted. Everything from your organization having a bad day, right? Leaders having a bad day, or environmental effects. All those things don't exist in this game, right? And we're kind of using that staff planning points or the operations, we call them friction points, the friction points to replicate that. So there's always things you want to do in a given day. You never know how much you can actually get done. So the focus is really not to replicate, crappy staff officers or imperfect information, but to make people think about what is important, what is critical, and how to plan that, right? So forcing people to think about things they haven't thought about before. which is what am I going to do 72 hours out? That's the first thing you have to answer every turn. And that's very hard for the playtesters and even for myself sometimes. And then what you see, the easy things to do are to, lay on fire missions, and to plan effects above the division level. And that's actually a good place to be if we got people thinking about that deep fight, thinking about that 48, 72-hour fight, right? It's not necessarily maneuvering your battalions, or maneuvering your brigades at that time. It's laying on those additional assets that require more time and or coordination to achieve effects on the battlefield. So division staff officers, so division staff and players and brigade staff and below are simulated. I'm gonna try to answer your question, Jeff. So yes. So this is really designed to be a 1v1 game in the way and time and space that you have for LPDs. If you're going to use this as like a mass thing, it would be multiple people playing multiple games. So it's really not intended to be a full staff exercise. It could, but you would really have, at the end of the day, one player doing the actions or pointing it down, and everyone could be discussing it. But yeah, everything below the battalion level is simulated. So the back here, the combat power that you see in there is the combat power of all the brigades all the battalions within the brigade. It just seemed a lot cleaner. You had a lot less pieces to move around. There's a really good game called Bellum, which ironically was a war game about Ukraine and Russia having a kinetic fight. And it was a division level game, and you maneuvered battalions. Really cool game, but when you start talking about a division and all its battalions, it's like, who do you want to include? Who do you want to leave out? And it's easier just to abstract it at the brigade level and focus on the brigade combat team. And it just reduces the amount of pieces you need for a game. I think in this game you have an even 9-9 or 9-8 pieces that you're moving around. And it kind of drives home that I don't want to sell it short and call it an entry-level game, but just a fluid and rapid game to play. Because I think when we played Bellum with a bunch of wargamers, it took about 3.5 hours. And it was a good game. There were some really cool things that we pulled from it. But I just wanted to be a little bit tighter of a system for that, for this game. Another thing, now that we're kind of on the topic of things that we abstracted, the thing I struggled with here was national characteristics in wargaming, right? As a person who plays bolt action and the different. Oh yeah, I just have this slide for future considerations, but that was the last slide. Yeah. So national characteristics, right? You don't want to, right? You have this very tight rule set. It's balanced, and you have a known to pivot off of, and then you throw in special rules to a game. And special rules, especially if it's a game with point values, right, can completely throw a game off. So what I tried to do here, is you can see the different mission sets you could potentially get. So the core mission is basically the same, right? It's seizure of that city, but you have different variables, and I wanted each force to have both a secondary objective, something that they would wanted to kill from the enemy or destroy from the enemy, and something that they wanted protected, right? So this kind of idea of critical requirements and critical vulnerabilities. So that's why we have the 3 different options that both sides can get. And it kind of plays into, even if we don't achieve victory, if I'm able to neutralize your artillery, your division artillery, right, that might put me over the edge for victory points because that was my mission. And that's a lot of things you see at like the CTCs as well, the combat training centers. You always like assume retention of the ground is potentially the thing that you wanted, but the enemy that you're facing might not be enemy higher commanders decisive operation. It might just be a shaping operation. With that in mind, maybe all they wanted to do was force you to deplete combat power and maybe reduce your artillery capability because it was a shaping operation. It wasn't the actual decisive point for the enemy commander. So we'll get into logistics right now, since I've seen a couple questions with them. Logistics is used twofold. You have an opportunity to give an order to a logistics unit, and you can see it there in the card for the support unit with the symbol for the wrench. So that would replenish a step loss. So jumping back a slide, if Lancer Brigade had 2 step losses and you gave an order for resupply, right, they would regenerate 1 step loss. And also it's used as a limiting factor for forces. So for both armies right now in this game, it's 6 hexes. If a unit at the end of the turn, you have to do a hex check, line of communications check, and if you don't have line of communications, which is drawing a line right from no enemy in between hexes in between you and your logistic element, if you're more than 6, you're going to take a step loss at the end of the turn. So that kind of adds constraint to add a little bit more realism, because the first couple times people were just taking tank brigades and shoving them, 40 kilometers from the rest of the division and having these great decisive tank battles in the middle of nowhere on day 3. And it is a consideration, right, for large-scale combat operations. Your operational reach is really determined by the location and disposition of your logistics. So for Jeff, how mobile are logistics elements? Can they really not need to use the road? I think I happily skirted around that by abstracting and pulling the roads out of the game. So the logistics element, as you can see there, it moves 3. So if you are moving, that's 3 hexes. If you're going into restricted terrain, to move into that terrain is going to cost 2. To move into heavily restricted is going to cost 3. So in those areas, I wanted that they have the lowest amount of movement possible in this game. Because what you didn't want is to have a situation where logistics element couldn't move into heavily restricted terrains that might be beneficial for them. So three movement points, which is shown on the bottom here. So you have all the units, you have what unit they belong to. And that number right there is the amount of movement points you have when that unit is given a move order. Yes. So Mark's question is, are you challenging a division player with how they allocate enablers to the brigades? Yes. So both internal enablers with the division fire cell, as well as external enablers with core fires, and also the application of the combat aviation brigade. So the options you have for the combat aviation brigade are a little abstracted, but I think I'm happy with how they stand right now. So you can put a combat aviation brigade in counterattack. So if your unit is attacked, it's a passive order. So in this instance, if it is your turn, you're doing your now orders, you're executing your operations. I can respond to your attack once you've amassed all your combat power and say I have attack aviation, in counterattack. So the attack aviation would move from the spot that they're at. They would move adjacent to the combat. They would add their combat power to that combat, and they would take step losses as appropriate. And then a couple other things that we had in here was strikes and long-range fires, right? So core fires, this game, we kind of just set it in 2025. So assuming that both sides have core fires that don't necessarily exist or are in the process of existing, those additional assets. Yes. So the question is, how about applying this same rule set to other scenarios, opposing forces? 100% that's in the future. Because this is a thesis that is getting submitted in 30, 40 days, I wanted to make a core, I wanted to make the guts of the game as solid as possible before I moved into expansions. So definitely working on a Russian force, a British force, And the next map that we're massaging is something in Central Africa, even though that would be another PRC versus USA fight. But obviously, things in Ukraine, there's a lot of cool maps that are out there that we could have another a battle out there or a battle in Estonia. But yeah, absolutely. The intent of this project was just to develop a foundation to which I could pivot from to and really make applicable. So what you could even do here, what you would lose is the restricted, heavily restricted, and unrestricted terrain. But honestly, you could take a BattleTech map. So any standard hex map. I'm thinking about BattleTechs. I'm staring at BattleTech miniatures right now. And you can play this game on a BattleTech map. So really just try to have that fluidity of play that exists in miniatures war games that doesn't necessarily exist in tabletop war games. Yeah, so the question is, are there options for deliberate defense and the variables involved in that? Yes. So if you are giving the defend order, so the opposite of a move/attack order is a defend order, and you can see that with the brigade defensive position operational term and graphic there next to Lancer Brigade on the slide. So if I give that order to a unit, that is going to result in a shift in the combat results table. So I guess it's a failing on me for presentation. I didn't know how much into the weeds we would want to get into the game. So for combat resolution, just to baseline this, right? So if it's if we, just like a regular game, if you played Battle for Moscow, we do our combat results, we figure out how much combat power, we find that ratio. So if we find the ratio to be 3-to-1, right? Now we apply all the modifiers. So modifiers are fires, whether it's core fires or division fires. So fires are going to be a column shift in the direction of the user, right? So you could have a passive order for defensive fires for the defense, right? And that would shift that 3-to-1 to a 2-to-1. So let's just take that variable out. It's a 3-to-1 fight. You are attacking me here, and I reveal that, hey, this unit was on a defend order. So what's going to happen there is that 3-to-1 odd, and this is assuming that we're in just unrestricted terrain, we're in the open, that 3-to-1 odds is going to move to a 2-to-1. So that's going to give you a column shift in the defender's direction. And the reason for that is, a unit is going to defend itself, so we didn't feel like it was necessary to force the player to spend planning points to, say, defend. But if you are going to do a deliberate defense, that takes resources, that takes extra logistical constraints on those units. So yeah, you have to spend one of your precious operations points to do one of those operations. All right, so the question here is, what conclusions have you reached from playtesting, and do you see students improving how they think about operations within that 72-hour time frame through multiple iterations of play? So very limited on the number of people who have multiple iterations of play. But what I think I've seen in the short time I've had to playtest this is moving, especially since we have this basis from Land Power to kind of pivot off of, right? So we kind of have almost a common experience with my playtesters for the game that we played in CGSC. Just the virtue of saying 72, 48, 24 hours, figure it out. And once you plan that order for next turn, you can't go back and go that cheaper order. It makes people think about what's important. So you'll have some of the playtesters have sat there and it tried to have this very scripted, at this point, I'm going to be at this hex and I want these assets. And other players have internalized it as, hey, I don't know what's going to happen 2 turns from now. All I know is I'm going to need artillery. I'm going to need air defense. And then they just move on. Yeah, so the game is actually a 5-day game. So I'll move back to this slide. Sorry, I'm jumping around. I'm getting slide happy here. So what happens is at the end of your turn, at the end of the game turn, right? So for clarity for the rule book, right? It's each day is called a round, and each round has a player turn. So at the end of the day or the round, you would slide those orders down. So the order menu that is in the now slot will come off the board. Any orders that weren't used may be applied to the incoming order card as it slides down. But a unit can't have multiple orders on a day. So if Lancer Brigade is already tasked now and next turn, you can't carry over an order that wasn't used this turn. So yeah, it would slide down, and then a new card will come across. So there is a card for each day of the war game. So if you go into Tabletop Simulator, or you search decisive operations, you'll see the game, and there's 5 planning cards. Only 3 will be on the table at a time. And then after each game round or each day, it will shift down 1 card. So in the now, the card that's in the now, the planning card that's in the now will correlate to the day that the game turn is on. Okay, so the question is, what's something that I've identified in playtesting that changed significantly from your original design? So the original design of this map is completely changed. So it used to be area map. I wanted to have an area map for some reason. I was really adverse to having a hex map. So I went on Microsoft Paint. I made this very nice area map and followed the contour lines, thought it made sense. And it was absolutely destroyed like the 3rd time it was playtesting. So I thought by making an area map, I was having players focus on the decisions that I want them to focus on, or what the game is trying to inform the things to think about, which is planning future operations and what assets you can add to a brigade to enable success in modern combat. But what ended up happening is people were fighting over the map or what the map meant. So I had this, internal battle of, I want to produce a map that is realistic, right? So this is central Thailand. You should be able to Google Maps, and it looks somewhat similar to central Thailand, but abstracted enough that we're not arguing over the map. Because really all you need to know is if it's restricted, unrestricted, or heavily restricted. So that was one of the things that I identified was I thought I was creating more clarity, and what I did is I created a lot more confusion. So just throwing those hexes on there and saying, nope, these are left and right limits, it really helped. Are the edges of the map hard or soft? Could you elaborate on that one a little bit more, please? Okay, so while I get some clarity on the edge of the map questions, just looking in the chat. So the total game session, like I said in the beginning, the goal is to play it in under 2 hours. So you're going to be able to replicate 5 days of combat in a 2-hour lunch, an LPD, or a gaming session. And the size of the table is 20 inches by 20 inches. So that will fit on a folding table. It'll fit on a kitchen table. So that's really, again, the ease of use there. Okay. If forced to retreat, are you out of play? Okay. That is an interesting question. That has not actually come up in playtesting. Nobody has been cornered on the side of the map. I have not put any thought into that. That's actually something nice to write down. Yeah, I don't. Undefined right now. Yeah, I have not run into that. So what normally happens if you lose combat, you will retreat, or you have the option to retreat 2 hexes. So one of the unique things that I wanted to do to differentiate the game from Battle for Moscow, if you are the defender, you will always have the option, regardless of the outcome of the combat, to take one step loss and retain the position. So if I go back one slide, so if we're in a 3-to-1 fight and you roll a 5 and I'm the defender and I'm red, so in the game, if you're the red player, the colors are switched. So it's you're always the color that you are, blue being the American player, red being the People's Liberation of the Army player. So I've taken 4 step losses. I can choose to retreat 2 hexes, or I can take another step loss, a 5th step loss, if I want to retain that ground. Through playtesting, just giving those players the actual decision and not making it automatic always seemed to be the best option. You get the most kickback, especially from members in the military who are not necessarily wargamers when they don't have options, right? Because that it forces them to think about what terrain is worth combat power, so they're not forced to retreat. Yeah, so I think I answered that with I haven't thought about that. That hasn't happened. So 6 steps per unit, as you see here. Yep. So what normally happens is combat is pretty bloody, that's intended, right? And so the abstraction here is each step loss is 10% of combat power, but not necessarily 10% of the unit gone. Combat power is just a consolidation of men, material, and equipment and will to fight. that's a good question. Yeah. So the cool thing about this, right? Because this game is being done through while I'm at CGSC, uh, it's going to be public domain, right? So I joke and I say it's the people's game. So this game, is in its entirety, will always be available as a free download, if nothing. And I'm working on options here to have it physical. So it's something that I can either have on the order sheet for units to be able to order and play, or have available, and basically the cost would just be the cost of the material. Yes. So the correlation to the division boundaries, what we have is around 100-kilometer, a little bit longer box, even though it's not a box. So it's probably 60 kilometers, I think, is how we shrunk it down. 60 kilometers wide, 100 kilometers deep. And that's just going through the open source threat tactics manual on Chinese doctrine. The subsequent brigade, or I'm sorry, the subsequent objective is around 100 kilometers. So it's abstracting the division boundaries with not actually showing the division boundaries. That could actually be an option in the future for if that actually helps scope it. I have not played NATO Division Commander. I will try that out. And that was the other. So the organizations are based off of the open source MTO that you can find online. And there had to be a little bit of I don't want to call it guessing game, but some creativity about the scenario. So in this scenario, it's 2025, and the unit that is forward is 25th, or is second ID. So second Infantry Division is forward with their strikers because we are sending strikers to Thailand for the Thai Army. So when this thing kicks off, you have 2 ID with 25th ID headquarters, quarterbacking this thing, because 2 ID is solely focused on Korea. And then that green unit there is is a tank battalion from the Royal Thai Army. And then everything you see there for the Chinese forces, for the People's Liberation Army, is the 74th Army. So I believe the 74th Army is in the Southern Theater, Southern Command. So yeah, they're based off of what I can find, and also what made sense, because I wanted a scenario that kind of made sense of why these 2 forces were fighting. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, this is Brand. I'm going to pop into the stream here just real quick. Yeah. We can absolutely continue this dialogue over in the other Discord channels, but I want to let folks know if you were wanting to go catch Jason Matthews' talk on wargaming, on incorporating politics into war games, it's starting like now. And I know this means we're going to run about 10 minutes short from the original hour we promised you. Sorry about the technical gaffe at the very beginning there with the YouTube stream. We've got 2-3 more minutes here, but I just want to make sure folks knew that Jason's talk was about to start. If you needed to jump over to that and finish this up on the recording later, or I don't know if Dan is going to want to stick around in the Discord and continue some of the text chat there, or just clean up some of the questions later. If you guys ask them once the YouTube video is available to ask the questions there, it's Dan, it's really up to you how you want to tackle that.
Yeah, I'll make myself available in Discord. And if you can't be there, if you're in the future watching this, leave a question down there and I'll come back and comment on it.
Yeah. So if you're looking for where the Discord text channel is for this presentation, it's in Wednesday. And so again, the original 4 core events are the ones numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. But the large, I'm trying to remember exactly what the Discord is called. Large scale ops is the text channel there. That if you've got additional questions, you can go ahead and throw them in there if that's what you're looking for. So otherwise, I think we're kind of wrapped here. You're getting a lot of thanks and congratulations show up in the channel there. So clearly got a fan club going here.
Well, thank you guys for all the good questions.
So cool. Dan, thank you very much for joining us here at Connections Online. It's fun stuff like this that make this a cool conference to do, because it's not just lots of folks hanging out at podiums. It's a chance for folks to get some conversation going in the chat, as well as some of these shorter presentations like yours that turn out to have some really cool stuff in them. So
yeah, thank you for having me. I feel like I was
the final on this.
What was that?
Looking forward to seeing the final version of this.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely publicize it when it comes out.
All right, so I'm gonna back out of here if Dan's got any final wrap up